Where was Jesus born? Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, where is he who was been born King of the Jews? Okay. Now, Herod asked the Jewish scribes, where will the Messiah be born? Gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, was inquiring of them where the Christ was to be born. They said to him, Bethlehem of Judea. That's where Jesus was born. Now, he settled there for at least 2 years. He was living in a house. How do I know for at least 2 years? Let me show you. He was born there, but they found a house there because he was born in a manger. But when they found him, a child living in a house. So he's no longer a baby. He's no longer in a manger. And you're going to see how we calculate this. Bethlehem, land of Judea, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah. Micah 5:2. For out of you shall come forth a leader who will shepherd my people Israel. All right. And after coming into the house, notice he's in a house. They saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi departed for their own country by another way. Now notice, he's in a house. He's not in a manger, folks. Luke says there was no room for them in the inn, so he was born in a manger. He's not in a manger. He's in a house, a child. We know he's around 2 years. That means they spent at least 2 years in Bethlehem. How do we know? Watch here. Matthew 2:16 and 22. Then when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem. Why Bethlehem? Because Jesus was born in Bethlehem, living in a house in Bethlehem, and its vicinity from 2 years old and under. Why didn't he say just kill all newborn infants? According to the time which he had carefully determined from the Magi, because a period of time elapsed. He calculated that by the time they came to me and left, then the child will be at least 2 years old. Right? So where was Jesus born? Bethlehem. Where did he reside for at least 2 years? Bethlehem. That's why they found a house. Most likely Joseph's ancestral home. Okay? 2 years. Sounds familiar to Moses, right? Pharaoh had male children born, slaughtered. All right. Now, when they came, slaughtered male children 2 and under, it says it fulfilled what was written in Jeremiah. But remember in Jeremiah, Jeremiah is talking about Rachel weeping, heartbroken, that the Jews have been dispossessed, the temple burned, Jerusalem burned, and the Jews thrown out of the land in exile, so no more children living in the land. That's what Jeremiah is referring to. Why is Matthew applying it to Jesus? Now you'll see. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she was refusing to be comforted because they were no more. Now notice, Herod did not know Jesus had already gone down to Egypt. He was already in Egypt at this time. Okay. But guys, if this is about the Babylon captivity, why is it applied to Jesus? Why is Rachel weeping? Here's why. Let's see if you make the connection. Genesis 35:16 to 19. Where did Rachel die? Then they journeyed from Bethel, and there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. Rachel gave birth. And she suffered severely in her labor. Now it happened that when she was in severe labor, the midwife said to her, do not fear, for now you have another son. Now it happened as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died, and was buried on the way of Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Now you see why? Do you guys see why? Because the children of Bethlehem are also her children, because she was buried there initially. And where did the slaughter take place? In Bethlehem. In other words, what Matthew sees is that Rachel will always weep for any of her children when they are slaughtered and oppressed unjustly, no matter where they're at. So Matthew is right again. What did I tell you? Remember what I showed you yesterday? How Isaiah 6, Isaiah 29 were about Isaiah's contemporaries, though Israelites were wicked and evil, but those passages were being applied to the Jews of Jesus's day and the days of the apostles, because passages may have an initial fulfillment, but are still applicable to different generations at different times if they exhibit the same qualities and carry out the same deeds. Do you see why Matthew appropriated Jeremiah about Rachel weeping at the destruction of Jerusalem and Judah, weeping over the plight of her descendants, and applied that to what happened to the male sons 2 and under in Bethlehem, saying she's weeping again? Why? Because Bethlehem was where she was buried. Yes, by the way, this shows communion of the saints. Though she's dead, she's still alive, and she's aware of the plight of her people. She weeps for what's happening to her people. She's aware, she's conscious, she's alive. Where did the slaughter of male sons 2 and under took place? Bethlehem. Where was Rachel buried? Bethlehem. You understand? Only someone stupid and ignorant will not be amazed at Matthew, because that tells you Matthew knows his Bible. Why? Matthew could only make this connection if he knew what the Old Testament says about where Rachel was buried. Bethlehem. And the light switch went on. Oh, Bethlehem. So he reasoned, if Rachel would be weeping for the Jews who were thrown out of the land of Judah, when Judah, Jerusalem, temple were destroyed, how much more will Rachel be weeping in the very place where she was buried, in light of male children 2 and under being slaughtered? You understand? Matthew was a genius. That shows you he knew the Bible better than us. Because how many of you would have made that connection? Let's go here. Judas Maccabeus was given a dream that was more like a vision. Remember, Onias the high priest had been murdered before Judas. Jeremiah the prophet had been dead for about 200 years. Watch. 2 Maccabees 15, 11, 17. So Judas encouraged his soldiers, gave them confidence not to be afraid and fight, and that they would win. He armed each of them not so much with confidence and shields. Don't trust your weapons and spears as with inspiration of brave words. And he cheered them all by relating a dream, a sort of vision that was worthy of belief. What he saw was this: Onias, who had been high priest, a noble and good man, of modest bearing and gentle manner, one who spoke fittingly and had been trained from childhood in all that belongs to excellence, was praying with outstretched hands for the whole body of the Jews. Now remember, Onias was dead physically. He's seeing him in a vision, but he still recognizes him, because though you don't have a physical body, you have a spiritual form. When your spirit leaves, you still have a form and a shape. That's why he could see him as a spirit lifting his hands. Note what Onias is doing. He's praying for the Jews, even though he's dead. Then in the same fashion, another appeared. So you see someone else, distinguished by his gray hair and dignity, of marvelous majesty and authority. Now this should answer the question that I've answered 10 million times. Will we recognize each other? Yes, because Judas knew this other man was different from Onias, and this other man appeared with gray hair, though he didn't have a physical body. So you're going to recognize one another. And Onias spoke, saying, this is a man who loves. Note, not used to love, he still loves the family of Israel. Not used to pray, he's still praying much for the people of the Holy City. Jeremiah the prophet. Wow, Jeremiah, 20 years after he physically died, is seen alive, still praying, still loving his people. How much more Rachel? If Jeremiah is still praying for God's people, and he still loves them 20 years after he died, Onias too, Rachel, no? No Rachel? Here you also have communion of saints. Jeremiah stretched out his right hand, even though he has a physical body, and gave to Judas a golden sword. And as he gave it, he addressed him thus: take this holy sword, a gift from God, with which you will strike down your adversaries. Encouraged by the words of Judas, so noble and so effective in arousing valor and awakening courage in the souls of the young, they determined not to carry on a campaign, but to attack bravely, because they got a sign from God. God showed them two righteous believers, the high priest who had been murdered, Jeremiah the prophet, praying for them, ensuring by their intercession God would fight for them, giving him a sword, saying, God has given you the victory. They determined not to carry on a campaign, attacked bravely, and decided the matter by fighting hand to hand with all courage, because the city and sanctuary and temple were in danger. Okay. Is this all sinking in now? Because now we're going to go to the final part. Matthew 2:23. This again is going to show you the brilliance of Matthew. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, get up, take the child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel. For those who sought the child's life are dead. So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus, he wanted to go back to Bethlehem, but when he saw Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Then after being warned by God in a dream, or being warned in a dream, this is italicized, he departed for the district of Galilee, and came and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken through the prophets would be fulfilled: he shall be called a Nazarene. There is no such prophecy. Or is there? Now let's see who's going to catch it. I want you to see, I put it on the screen, so that what was spoken through the prophets would be fulfilled. Okay. Now watch the formulaic way of introducing prophecy in the Old Testament. Here he says, spoken through the prophets. Okay. Watch here. Then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. Here it says, spoken through Jeremiah the prophet. All right. How about the other one? What had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet would be fulfilled. Notice, prophet, saying, out of Egypt I called my son. All right. Let's go here earlier. For this is what has been written by the prophet. Notice, prophet. Okay. How about here? Matthew 1:22-23. Now all this took place in order that what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet would be fulfilled, saying, did everyone catch the pattern? Whenever Matthew is referring to a passage in the Old Testament that you can find, he says prophet, singular. Isaiah 7:14 is there. Okay. When he quotes the scribes, citing Micah 5:2, this is what is written by the prophet, singular. Okay. When he quotes Hosea 11:1, says, in order that what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet would be fulfilled, singular. And then even Rachel, then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet, singular. So note the pattern. When Matthew wants to quote a reference that's in the Bible, he'll say, the prophet, what was spoken by the prophet. But he changes it here. You know why? Because he's not quoting a specific prophet or verse. So that what was spoken through the prophets would be fulfilled. This prophecy is completely different, because Matthew just cued you onto the fact No prophet wrote these words. That's why when you put the words in quotation marks, you can confuse people into thinking he's quoting a verse. No, he is summing up what the prophets have spoken in general about the Messiah. So if I show you the Greek, there are no quotation marks. See how deep this is? If it's your love. So note, it's not one prophet. It's what the prophets have spoken collectively, generally. So he's telling you, don't expect to find these words. I'm not quoting an actual verse. Moron. See, there are no quotation marks. Hati, right? Spoken through the prophets. Hati, a Nazarene, he'll be called. There are no quotation marks, dude. In other words, this fulfill what the prophets spoke, that he'll be called a Nazarene. He's not quoting. There are no quotation marks in Greek. You guys caught it? There is no contradiction. He does not say that was spoken through the prophet. When he wants you to know he has a prophet in mind, or a verse in mind, a passage in mind, he'll say prophet, and at times name the prophet. Here he says prophets. Okay, we got that so far? Before I move on, this little detail, does that blow you away? This one detail, does that blow you away? Before I go on. So then, if he's not referring to an actual verse, guess what, folks? Now you got to go and search the Old Testament in its entirety to see how the prophets, right, spoke of him being a Nazarene. Because you have to first understand what it would imply and mean for Christ to be a Nazarene who was then raised in Nazareth. That's the cue. What's the implication of settling in Nazareth, being called a Nazarene? What is the implication? And once you understand the implication, then the light switch goes on. Now let's go into the response. So you understand? He's not telling you that you're going to find these words in the Old Testament. That's why he says prophets. He's telling you, search the prophets to see how they alluded to the fact that Christ will be a Nazarene, and understand the implication of being a Nazarene. Now we're going to see in what sense and in what way did the prophets identify Christ as a Nazarene. Number one, the Bible often uses puns. Puns where one word sounds like another word, and they'll pun it. For example, Abraham and Sarah laughed at the notion of having a son in their old age. And then when Isaac was born, she rejoiced and laughed and called him Isaac. It means laughter. Or when Esau came out, they saw he was hairy. And so they called him Esau, a pun on the Hebrew word hairy. You see how it works? Or Moses was drawn out of the water, and so he was called Moshe, mean to draw out. Are you seeing the puns? You understand the puns? What a pun is? It's all throughout the Old Testament, New Testament. Now, some scholars don't accept that this is a pun, but nonetheless, they're entitled to their opinion. Do you guys know what a pun is, right? It's all throughout the Bible. Read it. And Moses was drawn out of the water, and so he was called Moshe, to draw out, a pun on him being taken out, drawn out of the water. Or Isaac is called laughter because they laughed. Or Esau was called Esau because he was hairy. These are puns, right? Okay. Nazarene can be a pun on the fact that in Isaiah 11:1, one of the messianic titles for the Messiah is Netzer. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, from his roots, a branch. Now, typically the word branch is simach, but here It's Netzer. And Netzer can be a play on Jesus being Yeshua ha-Notzri, because Netzer sounds like the Hebrew word Notzrati, Nazarene. And Jesus was called Yeshua ha-Notzri, a play on upon a Netzer. Now, if someone tells you, well, hold on, how would they know that? Many of them are illiterate, and it's in Greek. Because the Bible was not written for you to take home and read at home. The Bible was written for a qualified, spirit-filled teacher, a bishop trained by the apostles, to explain what is written. And by the way, this was the interpretation proffered by early Christian writers like Jerome. Here you go. Jerome, letter 57 to Pamachius on the best method of translating. Jerome, once more it is written, quote, once more it is written in the pages of the same evangelist, and he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. Let these word fanciers and nice critics of all composition tell us where they have heard the words, and if they cannot, let me tell them that they are in Isaiah. Look, Jerome before us. From the place where we read and translate, because he studied Hebrew, by the way, there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. In the Hebrew idiom, it is written thus, there shall come forth a rod out of the root of Jesse, and a Nazarene shall grow from his root. How can the Septuagint leave out the word Nazarene? See, he's trying to justify why you need a fresh translation of the Old Testament from Hebrew into Latin, not go with the Greek. If it is unlawful to substitute one word for another, it is sacrilege either to conceal or to set at naught a mystery. Secondly, another reason why Matthew could refer to the prophets identifying Christ as a Nazarene, because Nazareth had a bad reputation. Nazareth was looked down upon, frowned upon by the Jews. I'm not making it up. It's in John. Okay. Note, Nazareth was a place of dispute, ill repute, looked down upon, frowned upon, and therefore rejected by the people. That's why, watch here, John 1, 10, 11, 45, 46. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Pay attention. Rejected by his own. That's Isaiah 53. Now watch the reaction of him being from Nazareth. Philip found Nathanael and told him, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Now watch your action. Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? There you go. The Old Testament speaks of the servant, Messiah, being looked down upon, frowned upon, hated, rejected, despised. This now gives us an understanding why of all places that Jesus could be raised, he was raised in a place that was looked down upon and despised in order to fulfill the fact that he would be one that no one would be drawn to or desirous of, because not only was he born to a poor family, his family's too poor, but he was raised in all places in a ghetto. Truly the epitome of someone rejected and despised and hated. So Nazareth refers to him being despised, rejected, frowned on, and hated.